Look at the phone in your hand, the computer you are using, the car you are driving, the AI you are talking to, and even some of the world's most advanced weapons. They all have something in common: tiny computer chips. You can't see them, you probably never think about them, but without them, modern life would almost stop. And here is the surprising part: a huge amount of the world's most advanced chips come from one company, TSMC, based in Taiwan. So, how did a company most people had never heard of become one of the most important companies on earth? Why do Apple and NVIDIA depend on it? Why is China so interested in Taiwan? And why has the United States turned computer chips into a major part of its global strategy? This is not just a story about technology, it's a story about money, power, national security, and the future of the old economy. This is the global chip war. Let's start with the simplest question. What is TSMC? TSMC stands for Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. But that name does not really tell you why it's so important. Think about the world's biggest technology companies. Apple designs its own chips. NVIDIA designs powerful chips for artificial intelligence. AMD designs processors. Other companies design chips for cars, phones, servers, and countless other devices. But designing a chip and actually manufacturing the chip are two completely different things. And this is where TSMC comes in. TSMC specializes in manufacturing chips designed by other companies. In simple words, Apple can say, "Here is our chip design." NVIDIA can say, "Here is ours." And TSMC has the factories, the machines, the engineers, and the manufacturing expertise to turn those designs into real physical chips. This business model changed the technology industry forever. Back in the 1980s, the semiconductor industry looked very different. Companies often designed their own chips and manufactured them in their own factories. But one engineer had a different idea. His name was Morris Chang. He believed there was an opportunity to create a company that would manufacture chips for other companies without competing against those customers by selling its own competing chips. That company became TSMC, and this was a huge idea because suddenly a company did not necessarily need to spend billions building and operating its own chip factory. It could focus on designing the chip and let TSMC handle manufacturing. Over the decades, the model became incredibly powerful. Now, you might be thinking, why can't Apple, NVIDIA, or another giant company just build its own factory? Well, they can, but it's unbelievably difficult. A modern advanced semiconductor factory is called a fab, and a fab can cost tens of billions of dollars. Inside, you don't simply have machines making computer chips. You have an extremely controlled environment because even tiny particles can damage the manufacturing process. The machines have to be incredibly precise. The materials have to be extremely pure. Temperature, humidity, air quality, vibration, everything matters. And then there is the manufacturing process itself. A modern chip can contain billions of teeny transistors. Think about that. Billions of teeny electronic switches packed onto a piece of material smaller than your hand, making them work correctly again and again at enormous scale is one of the hardest manufacturing challenges humans have ever created. Let's make this simple. Imagine you want to build a giant city, but instead of buildings, you are creating billions of teeny electrical components. You start with a thin piece of silicon called a wafer. Then layer after layer, the factory creates incredibly teeny patterns on that wafer. One of the most important technologies involved is called lithography. You can think of it like extremely advanced printing. Instead of printing words on paper, you are creating microscopic patterns that eventually become part of the chip. Then different materials are added, removed, and shaped over and over again. Eventually, one wafer can contain hundreds or even thousands of individual chips. So the next time you hold a smartphone, remember the processor inside it began as part of a highly engineered manufacturing process like this. But there is another company you need to know, ASML. ASML is a Dutch company that makes some of the world's most advanced chip making machines using a technology called EUV, extreme ultraviolet lithography. So here is what makes the modern chip industry fascinating. TSMC does not operate alone. You have companies designing chips, companies creating manufacturing equipment, companies producing special chemicals, and companies making silicon wafers. The final chip is the result of a global chain, and no single country completely controls it. But TSMC sits at the most important point of that chain. Now let's bring this back to something familiar, your iPhone. Apple designs its own processors, but Apple does not manufacture those processors itself. TSMC manufactures Apple's leading chips. The same applies to NVIDIA. NVIDIA designs the world's most important AI processors, but someone has to manufacture them, and that someone is TSMC. So, when you hear AI is growing or Apple launched a new chip, there is a good chance the story leads back to TSMC. And then AI exploded. Suddenly, companies around the world wanted enormous amounts of computing power. AI models require powerful processors, and huge data centers require enormous numbers of advanced chips. The more demand there is for advanced AI chips, the more important semiconductor manufacturing becomes, and that puts even more attention on TSMC. Now we come to the most sensitive part, Taiwan. Why is Taiwan so important to the global chip industry? Because over decades, Taiwan built a powerful semiconductor ecosystem. It developed highly skilled engineers, specialized suppliers, and advanced infrastructure around chip production. TSMC becomes the center of that ecosystem, and the world becomes heavily dependent on Taiwan for leading edge semiconductor manufacturing. China considers Taiwan part of China, while Taiwan has its own government and operates separately. And because TSMC is so important, the Taiwan issue is not only about politics, it's also about technology. This is where the United States enters the story. The US wants to remain a leader in computing and AI. China wants to develop its own advanced capabilities, and Taiwan sits directly in the middle of this competition. This is why you keep hearing terms like chip war. Here is something that surprises many people. The US has placed restrictions on exporting certain advanced chip technology to China. Why? Because advanced chips can be used for much more than smartphones or gaming. They can support high performance computing and military defense systems. In the past, oil was the world's most important strategic resource. Today, chips are the new oil. Now let's imagine something. TSMC suddenly stops manufacturing advanced chips just for 1 week. Would the world shut down? No, but the effects would be serious. Tech companies would face massive delays. AI hardware production would stall, and car manufacturing across the globe would freeze. It's like a giant puzzle. If one critical piece disappears, the rest of the puzzle can't be completed. Governments know this is a problem. That's why countries are investing billions in domestic chip manufacturing. The United States, Europe, and Japan are all spending massive capital to build chip factories on their own soil. The goal is not to replace TSMC, it's to make sure one single geopolitical conflict does not crash the world economy. TSMC itself is expanding internationally, building major facilities in the US and Japan. But building a new fab is not like opening a store. You need specialized workers, chemicals, water, and electricity, and decades of experience. Recreating Taiwan's entire ecosystem is extremely difficult. This is the most underrated part of the story. TSMC's biggest advantage is not just factories, it's experience. When you manufacture millions upon millions of chips, you learn from every production cycle. That experience is TSMC's real secret weapon. So where does this go from here? AI needs more computing power. Cars are becoming computers on wheels, and every major tech trend depends on semiconductors. The future of the chip industry won't be about one country dominating everything. It will be about building a more resilient but much more expensive global system. So, what did we actually learn? You don't see TSMC's name on your phone. You don't see it when you open an AI app. But behind almost every technology we depend on, TSMC sits at the absolute core. The future of AI, smartphones, and global power is being decided inside extremely clean factories on a small island. The world's most powerful technology depends on something almost invisible, a chip, smaller than your fingernail. If you enjoy discovering how the world actually works, subscribe to Averiqa.